So thank you again for joining us for the Tips and Tricks for Successful Grant Writing webinar. You will hear from Chris Edmonston, President of Boat US Foundation and VP of Government Affairs for Boat US. Chris has served on a number of boards, from the National Safe Boating Council to the Sport, Fish, and Boat Partnership Council to our own RBFF board. Chris is involved in numerous grant committees and has had over 2 decades of experience writing and scoring grants.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining me. I'll start off by giving a little bit of background about myself to expand on what Joanne just said. I have been involved in grant writing for over 2 decades, and I have written and overseen dozens of successful grant applications that have brought in millions of dollars of grants. In my current job, I'm on numerous grant committees, from Boat US grants to RBFF grants. Work for the Department of the Interior, scoring boating infrastructure grants, and for the National Safe Boating Council. Over the past decades, I've reviewed thousands of grant applications, and the committees I've been on have given out nearly $100 million in grants. I've reviewed grants asking for as little as a few $100s and grants seeking up to $1.5 million. As far as grant writing goes, I've seen what works and what doesn't work. And it's my hope that this presentation will give you a little insight into what grantors want, and to really let you know that grant writing isn't nearly as tough as you might think it is. I'll say that this grant presentation will be talking about grants in general, but if you do have specific questions about the RBFF grant process or boating infrastructure grant, we can answer those as well at the end. I'm betting that many of you have gone fishing or any kind of activity out on a quiet day, maybe by yourself with a friend or family. It's a great time, you had fun, and it was probably low stress. If you compare that to fishing in a big tournament, even if you're on the exact same body of water doing the exact same thing, the experience can be very different. Grant writing is seen by some as being pressure-filled as fishing in a tournament, but it doesn't have to be that way. When you write a grant, you are doing and saying the exact same things you do in everyday life. You do not have to make it into a pressure-filled activity. And I'm going to talk to you today about the tips, tricks, and the dirty little secrets of grants that I've learned over the past 2 decades. We're going to cover quite a bit of information today, and again, please hold questions to the end. Actually, just type them into the system and we'll answer those at the end. And again, all my talking points will be on the RBFF website, available after this presentation. You might think that there's a lot of repetition in my talk, and you'll see why at the end. And if you're like me and have attention deficit issues, just try and concentrate on the secret slides. First, dirty little secrets. Grants are not given to help you reach your goals. Grantors give grants to help them reach their goals. And I think a lot of people are confused by this, that they think the money is there to help their causes. And while that's true to an extent, grants are absolutely given for promotion of the grantor. Grants are a marketing tool. In many ways, grants are used as an extension of the grantor's own efforts. They might not be able to have the reach or the access to your market or your particular demographic, but that's what they're looking for. Grants can be looked at as just another marketing tool, like a magazine ad or a TV commercial. Grants get the name of the grantor out to the general public in a different way than traditional advertising, but that is the essence of what a grant is. And if your grant application doesn't meet the grantor's needs, you won't get the grant. And that's a very simple phrase, but it's often overlooked by people applying for a grant. All grantors have very specific guidelines that are designed to help you write the grant, but they also help ensure that the grant satisfies their goals. What we're going to talk today about is 4 different aspects of the grant writing process. Each of the areas has a few key points, and I'm a big believer in the divide and conquer technique. Break up the work, or even better, share it with others. We're going to talk about game planning the grant, writing the grant, when the grant is approved or denied, and what to do after the grant period is over. For the game plan is really a high-level view of why you are writing the grant and getting all your ducks in a row before you start writing. Here are the parts that make up the game plan, in my opinion. What is the need for the grant? Brainstorming the idea, the timing of the grant, and do you have any connections? Looking a little bit more closely at the game plan, we'll talk about where you can find money, learning about the grantor, and resisting temptation when you write the grant. Looking at the need, we're going to talk about needs or wants, your strength in writing the grant, and specifics of the grant. Needs or wants. There's a huge difference between a need and a want. You really have to think about the things for which you are requesting money, and you cut your request to only what you need. When grant committees select grants for funding, I frequently see many grant offers made that cut the proposed budget, and the scoring committee slicing things off of the grant application that they do not think are central to the grant. Make sure your request is nothing more than what is necessary, or someone else will. Remember, grants are marketing tools, and grantors love to see their money go to as many groups as possible. If you are asking for a comparatively large amount of money, the chances of getting your grant cut or denied go up. As far as strengths go, does the grant application play to your strength? Is what you want to accomplish realistic? It's hard to get a grant for something that the scoring committee doesn't think you are capable of accomplishing. And frankly, be specific in your requests. You don't need a lot of language or a lot of words. Keep your request very simple. When I think about what goes into brainstorming, you have an idea and you get to think about which way your grant wants to go. So here's a few things to consider. What is your niche? Is your idea unique, or is it something someone else has done or you've done before? Are you an expert in the subject matter or in running that particular program? What is the gotcha? What about your grant proposal makes you the best recipient for that grant money? Remember, grantors love unique ideas because they are more press-worthy and they just are much more notable. If you are seeking funding for something you've done for years or something others do regularly, it isn't as notable or press-worthy and is less likely to be funded. You'll also need to figure out who your point person of your group will interact with the grantor. It doesn't have to be you, and the contact person doesn't have to be in charge of the project at all. But it should be someone who is very detail-oriented and can see the project through. Many organizations lose the ability to receive subsequent grants because they had the wrong point person. You must have someone who interacts well with the grantor and someone who will generate and send the reports as required in the terms of the contract. In a perfect world, you will have a great grant, build a great relationship, and continue to get money beyond the initial grant. When we talk about timing, try to figure out when you want to do the project and see if it lines up with what the timeline of the grantor may be. And I know that that's a particular issue with the RBFF grants, that the grant Reporting period can be very tight, depending on when you plan on starting your project. So that is something you need to consider, and whether or not this year is the right time to do it or a subsequent year is the right time to do it. Grantors have very specific cycles, all related to budgets, schedules, and their own PR needs. If the timing of your project does not match that of the grantors, then your best option is to wait or find another funding source. Asking for money out of cycle is a non-starter for almost all grant-giving organizations. Do you have any connections? Connections to the grantor may be very beneficial to you getting a grant. Let's face it, people give money to people. If you have a connection, use it. You may not know Warren Buffett or Ted Turner, but maybe you have a friend or a cousin who knows somebody who knows somebody. Any connection is positive. Likewise, it pays to take some time to get to know the person who administers the grants for the grantor. From personal experience, if they don't think it's going to be easy to work with you, the odds of you getting a grant go down dramatically. Where's the money? I can attest to you that there is money everywhere, maybe not in huge amounts, but many companies and large organizations issue grants, even to state agencies or their partners, and will help fund projects that get them exposure. Remember, grants are another form of advertising, so if your grant does a great job of getting publicity, your opportunities to get funding are greatly enhanced. Your grant may become a marketing partnership instead. One thing I always recommend is to try to learn about the grantor. And with the internet today, that should be very easy. I know for our foundation, what you want to do is look for details on their mission, their vision, and operating principles. Try to use phrasing, language, and lingo from the grantor's website in your application. Look to see what grants that have been given before. Determine how your grant complements the grantor's mission or current programs. Use social media pages like Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, or just a general Google search to see if you can determine specific interests of the grantors. Figure out who administers the grant for the grantors. And most importantly, read the application. Grants are not an afterthought. Most organizations that give grants specifically put it in their budget, amount of money to put towards grants. But they're not a giveaway, and they are not mandatory. If granting agencies do not receive grant applications that fit their criteria or needs, they won't give the money. It's not a mandatory for any grant organization to give out the money. I'll talk now about two types of people who you interact with any grantor. The grant scoring committee, people who actually determine whether or not you receive a grant. Scoring committees are usually composed of senior to very senior staff that will score your grant and then pretty much be done with the process. I'll tell you that senior staff enjoy reviewing and giving grants. They do not want to waste time looking at poorly written grants. They do not want to waste time trying to figure out specifics or to check to see if the math and the budgets add up. I would say senior staff are usually pretty smart, have a lot of common sense, and can see through misleading statements. Also, senior staff will almost always listen to grant administrator recommendations, either good or bad. So let's talk about the grant administrators. This is the day-to-day person that will help process the application and work with you should you get a grant. This is probably the most important person you'll deal with at the granting agency. The administrator can give you key information to help your grant be successful. Likewise, they can also ensure that you don't get a grant or don't receive another grant. I promise you, it's in your best interest to not irritate the administrator. And from my experience, most administrators are very willing to pick up the phone and answer questions because in the long run, that's going to make their job easier down the road. Resisting temptation. I can tell you if the things you request aren't central to the grant and if the central product isn't directly related to the grant application and the request, the typical grant committee will not see value in your application. An example of this, you might be planning a boating safety or a fishing day, and you want to provide t-shirts to the volunteers that are working at the event. It is really hard to justify the value of these items to a grantor, as it doesn't give them a good vehicle to promote their goals, and the item doesn't really speak to the central mission of the club or the grant. Don't ask for items that you don't need to accomplish your core mission that you would need to fund anyway. Grants aren't designed to be unrestricted gifts, and using grants to offset normal everyday costs usually doesn't work out very well. And when I think of a normal everyday cost, I'm thinking overhead, rent, salaries. Now, some grants do allow that, so you really need to pay attention to the guidelines of the grant. As a reminder, grants are ways to further the mission of the grantor, a reflection of their corporate values, a way for them to increase their visibility. It's also a tool for them to develop partnerships. I know RBFF loves the partnerships that have been accomplished through their grant process. And again, grants are marketing and PR by another name. Having said all that, grantors absolutely want to give their grant. My experience is I love giving out every cent I can, but I want to make sure that it goes to the right groups. Next secrets. Do your homework on the grantors and recognize that people give money to people. I can't emphasize the importance of understanding the grantor and the goals of the grantor. Moving on to writing the grant. When you get the application, you should have an honest review of the grant qualifications to see if you can or should apply. If you have an outsider that you know, ask them to give that same review of your potential grant application. You will have more success writing an effective grant if you read the instructions first and organize a plan for writing the grant. All throughout the application, you will find themes, buzzwords, key phrases that will help you decipher what a grantor is looking for and help you determine how best to write your grant. Once you have a plan to write your grant and an outline, think about the key phrases to add to your application and talk to the grant administrator for advice. More than likely, they will gladly give it, as it will make their job easier. You might say to yourself, I have a really great idea. It would be good for them as well as us. Maybe I'll try and get them to change their minds on what qualifies for a grant. Now, calling the grant manager to discuss it is walking a fine line. Saying something like, it would be great if you considered topics like mine in the future, that's one thing, but saying you need to change your rules and goals so that we qualify is something else. Grant managers don't set the guidelines and they cannot bend them for you. The best you can expect is for the grant manager to pass a message along for the next year. When you get to writing the grant, you will hear me say this many times, you must follow the instructions. Look over the application and ensure that everything is spelled correctly, the numbers add up, and your application complies with the instructions. And make sure you have any name, logo, or saying of the grantor spelled correctly. I can tell you that I have received hundreds of applications to Boat US, and they address it to Boats R Us. Boggles the mind. And don't even think about sending it in late unless you have received a pre-approved extension from the grant manager. Simply following the instructions will put you ahead of the majority of your competition, and that's a promise. Having reviewed thousands of grant applications, if you just do that, you will be far ahead of anybody you're going against. And the grant manager can make or break you. Do not ignore this relationship. Use the instructions in the application as a checklist, and make sure you have your best person managing the relationship with the grant manager. So what happens next? You've submitted the application, the grant scoring committee meets, and you have a couple of different outcomes. You can receive a full grant that you asked for. You can receive a partial grant, meaning that the scoring committee has decided to make you an offer, but maybe not for the full amount that you want, or you can be denied. If you don't receive the grant, talk with the grant manager. And if you approach them appropriately, you can most likely get insights on why the grant committee decided to not fund your grant. And you can take those insights and adjust your application for the next go around and see if the changes meet the guidelines a little bit better. And I would, again, avoid trying to argue your case with the grant manager. Remember, they do not make the scoring decisions, so it's not going to benefit you to argue. Then when the grant application period opens again, simply resubmit. From personal experience, there are many reasons aside from the merits of your idea that can impact whether or not you can get funded. And that could be things like how many other grants are similar to yours, any themes that the grant scoring committee may wish to follow, even the number of grants being sought from your particular area. I know for national grants, scoring committees like to have a national representation. So if there are many grants from, let's say, the Southeast, they might stop accepting grants from the Southeast and want to put some in the Northwest, as an example. How much you're asking can have an impact on it. If you're asking for a relatively large amount and there are many other grant applications out there, scoring committees can look at smaller grants to see if they can get more applications approved, just to extend the reach of the grants. And again, that applies to how much has already been given. If most of the grant funds have already been given out, they might, grant scoring committee might look for smaller grants, again, just to extend the reach of the application process. And also the perceived PR value of your grant. If there's a lot of opportunities for marketing, exposure, or partnerships, that will weigh in your favor. If you do receive a grant, you do want to establish a dialogue with the grant manager. Again, having a great relationship with the grant manager is critical to your ability to receive future grant funding. If the grantor wishes to give you a partial award, the grant manager will review the application with you and inform you where cuts or revisions should be made or could be made. This is also the time you can ask for the specifics of why things need to be revised. And if there are cuts, it's up to you to decide whether or not you can complete the task under the terms offered. If you decide that you can't, and that's fine, and there's no hard feelings, and you can just reapply next year. Keeping a professional and upbeat demeanor with the grant manager is vital. Remember, the grant manager didn't decide the terms of the grant and can help you through the process of any subsequent grant applications. Now, if you can fulfill the terms of the revised grant, hey, congratulations. And once you get rolling, make sure you meet the terms, especially as it relates to reporting and budget constrictions. Delays are okay, modifications are okay, but don't do them without prior approval, or at least giving advance warning that there is an impediment headed your way. After the grant, well, you've proved yourself. Now is when you keep in touch with the grantor and use this connection any way you can. It's the start of a new relationship, one that can help you down the road. You can also be a reference to other people seeking a grant and give them advice on how best to approach the grant process, and give yourself a pat on the back. Dirty little secrets. Don't take rejection personally or as a final word. There are lots of reasons to not receive a grant, and most likely it has nothing to do with the quality of your grant. There's many reasons that go into how grants are selected, and you always have the ability to talk with the grant manager to talk about the next year. And what you do after you get the grant determines whether or not you'll get another. Now we're going to spend some time to look at some actual grant application guidelines, and I'll show you things that I think are important. I picked them to highlight how to tell what's important to the grantor. And again, you must follow instructions. Not following instructions is the fastest way to get your grant denied. Now for this slide, you'll notice how the first line is highlighted. It's in bold. Applicants must submit 2 CDs with the application packets. Each CD must include the following. Notice how 2 CDs and must are underlined in the first line. All of that to me is a clear indication of how often people don't do something. Whenever you see an instruction in bold, in italics or underlined, it's a clear indication that the grantor is tired of people not following this particular instruction. The next one. This instruction isn't as blunt as a previous guideline, but there are clear instructions that are universal. Keep your application direct and to the point. Be concise. Be concise, be concise. The fewer words, the better. It will make it easier to remember and in a positive way. And I can tell you, it's hard to be concise and say what you want to say in a few words. That's really a sign of a good writer to do that. A good note on what happens to applications that don't listen to the length requirement. I know for the voting infrastructure grants, there's specific guidelines on length of applications, and many people ignore them. And as a reviewer, I absolutely do not review past the stated page count. So if the application says no more than 10 pages, after page 10, everything gets thrown away. And if you can't convey what you need in your grant in those 10 pages, well, that's tough luck. And frequently get page counts into the 20s and 30s when it clearly states 10 pages. And I can guarantee you that millions of dollars in potential grants have been lost because people didn't follow that simple instruction. Partners. More partners allow projects to have more significance. What a great line. What's another great reason to get outside involvement? It shows that you work well with others and that others think your idea is worthy. It lets the grant committee know that the application is potentially less risky for them. And if there are 2 nearly identical grants, one with no outside involvement and the other with, I can pretty much guarantee that the one with the extra partners will get the grant. It just makes it a much more compelling application. Creativity. Is this a new concept? Creativity gets extra credits. Here, BASS is being pretty explicit in their desire to only fund PR-worthy grants, and I can tell you that holds true with virtually every grantor. The more that an idea can be publicized, the better, and if it's just something that has been done before, you're not going to get it. Another thing you should try to do is figure out how your grant's going to be scored and try to give yourself an honest assessment before submitting the grant application. This is an old scoring sheet from the Voting Infrastructure Grants program. Clearly, this grant assigns point values to different sections of the application. Either you get the points or you don't. And groups that apply for big funding and don't self-assess often leave points on the table and miss out. Here's some guidance from the RBFF application. Notice how specific the information is. Notice the tools they give you to help you create your application. As a rule, failure to follow specific guidance is a recipe for writing a bad grant application. And again, RBFF gives specific tools that they want used. First-time buyers retention email campaign toolkit. That costs a lot of money and time to create, and RBFF wants that used, and that's why they put it in the application. Finally, I can't stress enough how important it is to follow instructions. And here are some examples of what Boat US puts into the application guidelines and what some applicants have requested. Guideline says we don't buy computer equipment. Fully 1/3 of our applications ask for computer equipment. We also say no salaries are covered, and we often get lines like this: we want to compensate our instructors for teaching this free course. Our grants must be directly boating related. And then we get applications that say this: we want to meet with lawn care pros in the area to educate them to limit fertilizer runoff into the lake. I can assure you that none of those grant applications received funding. Closing thoughts. If you cannot follow simple instructions when you write the application, you'll be viewed as a group that won't complete the grant according to the terms. If your budget requests seem too good to be true, it will be viewed with skepticism. Explain how you derived your numbers and provide quotes for the goods or services you wish to buy. Ensure the budget you discuss in the narrative or executive summary is not different than what's in the budget. If the line items don't match, you will lose credibility. And yes, I do see this all the time. And finally, make sure that your application is readable, has proper punctuation, and again, there are no math or spelling errors. Having these type of simple errors points to how well you or your group will be able to complete the grant. Always talk to the giver. The grant administrator is there to help you. Granting organizations want to give the grants. Follow the directions. That is the key number one tip of this presentation, is simply follow the directions. Get an extra read from an outside person who is not really familiar with the grant to see if it makes sense, if the spelling and punctuation and the math adds up, and make it easy for the grantor to give you money. In closing, I hope you have gotten or taken away some good information from the seminar, and I do promise you that as a grantor, I want to give away every cent I can every year. The essence of what I said today is this: the easier you as a grant writer make it for me to say yes, the greater your chance of getting funding. Grants are competitive, and you might have a great grant idea that doesn't get funded. Don't despair, don't take it personally, and don't give up. Use tips like what you heard today to strengthen your application and try again. And the final secret is you can do it. So with that, that ends my presentation, and I think now we're going to go into...
Thank you very much, Chris. Definitely appreciate all the information. I'd now like to turn it over to Stephanie Hussey, RBFF's Director of State R3 Program, to talk about RBFF-specific grants.
Thank you, both Chris and Joanne. I wanted to share with you a little bit more specifically about some of the grant programs that RBFF offers. We have two programs, our State R3 Program grants and our George H.W. Bush Vamos a Pescar Education Fund grant. The new grant cycle for the George H.W. Bush Vamos a Pescar Education Fund grants just launched on October 31st. You can find the grant guidelines on this web page. The Education Fund was initially developed in 2014 through a generous donation from Bass Pro Shops founder and CEO Johnny Morris in honor of President George H.W. Bush to bring conservation, education, and fishing experiences to Hispanic families. The Education Fund has continued to expand with the help of donations from other companies and organizations. This slide and the following slides are snapshots of information contained in the grant guidelines. For the Education Fund, these grants support programs that are focused on multiple opportunities for the same audience to participate in fishing and/or boating, metrocentric, and ethnically inclusive. As per the grant guidelines, through the Education Fund, there will be up to $80,000 available, and these funds are all non-federal dollars. Similar to this last year's grants, we offered the same amount of money, which supported 15 organizational programs in 6 different states. Grant funding is available for state agencies to receive and subgrant to local organizations. State agencies manage the process in their state to what their needs are in their state. State agencies in this grant program must provide a match to expand the impact of the grants in their local area. It's set up with a minimum of 1-to-1 cash match, so we can double the impact on the grounds, which means that up to $160,000 would be available through grant funding in this grant cycle. Matching funds can be through sport fish restoration dollars or other state funds or other sources of funds identified through partners. This year, a minimum of $5,000 total is required for grant program applications. Programs can run from February 1 through November 1. They must provide multiple opportunities for the same audience. This is an important aspect of this program. Research supports the importance of providing multiple opportunities for program participants to continue them along the pathway to becoming an angler. Programs will need to include skills development and on-the-water fishing or boating opportunities. The application form includes space for information on 3 touch points. Programs need to conduct evaluation surveys and collect participant information. The process timeline for the grants this year is such that state agencies review the information and determine their state process to distribute the application form and receive and review applications. State agencies determine the applications recommended for funding based on the matching funds availability and/or interest, and provide these recommendations to RBFF by December 14th. The advisory board then, which is made up of board members and donors from the fishing and boating industry, they review and select the final grant recipients nationwide by January 18th. Grant funding will be provided by January 31st. For grantee organizations receiving grants, quarterly reports must be submitted, and the final reports will be due to RBFF by December 2nd of next year. This shows a snapshot of the grant application and the state cover page forms, which were provided to a number of contacts in all 50 state agencies and DC. The grant application form is 4 pages to guide applicants through the information needed for consideration. The state cover page form is to be completed by the state agency to indicate the split of funds between the education funds requested and the state agency cash funds to be provided to add up to the total amount requested by the grant applicant. If additional in-kind funds are to be provided, these can also be indicated in the form. Again, the recommended grant applications and state cover page forms need to be submitted to RBFF by December 14th for this year's grants program. The other grant program that RBFF offers for state agencies is the State R3 Program grants. This program supports and provides funds to state angler and boater recruitment, retention, and reactivation initiatives and plans. There are 3 plans that are sustainable and replicable in other states, and that focus on increasing fishing license sales and boat registrations to help achieve our overall goal of 60 million anglers in 60 months. This year's program is currently wrapping up, and the new grant cycle will launch in late January of next year. You can find this year's RFP on our corporate site for reference. In the meantime, next year's will likely look similar with some tweaks based on programs and results from this year. This year's program offered up to $150,000 for grants, and we supported 10 programs in 8 states through the program this year. This and the following slides include snapshots of information in the RFP and application for the state R3 program grants. As outlined in the RFP, proposals are to be 1 to 3 pages long, no more than 3 pages, to include program objectives, description, the target audience for the program, expected outcomes and evaluation plan, timeline for the program, the budget, and plans to continue in the future if successful, and how it can be replicated by other state agencies. One of the purposes of the State R3 program grants is to help provide supporting funds to different ideas happening around in the different states nationwide, and to help provide examples for other states that they can replicate these programs in their states as well. The application form that goes out with the RFP outlines each of these sections of information to be included. And of particular note, the budget should be outlined in a budget table similar to the one shown here that was provided in the application form. So the budget should outline the total project budget broken out by the grant budget requested and the matching funds to be provided. And you can also note any additional in-kind project support. Matching funds have not been required for this grants program. However, greater consideration is given to those proposals that do provide matching funds. Again, each of the sections of information that are important in the application are outlined in the RFP and application form, and encourage applicants and proposals to follow that outline to more easily help in the review process with the review panel working group. The overall grants timeline for this State R3 program grants is that the RFP will be distributed by January 31st of next year. Proposals are typically due to RBFF by the end of February. The funding for this grants program will be distributed after April 1st of 2019. April 1st is the start of RBFF's next fiscal year, so the funding is aligned with our next fiscal year, again starting April 1 of 2019. Grantees must provide mid-progress and final reports and help draft case studies of the programs based on a template provided by RBFF. Final reports are due within 4 weeks of the program's end, ideally by the end of September. And again, the next grant cycle will launch in late January, and all our state agency contacts will receive notification when the RFP goes out. So stay tuned as we're wrapping up this year's program, and we'll launch that program in January of next year. As Chris recommended in his presentation, please carefully and thoroughly review the grant guidelines and RFP information in developing your grants proposals. They are slightly different for each of the grant programs as they're serving different purposes there. If you have any questions on either grants program, please reach out to me. This is my email address, and it's also included in both the grant guidelines and the RFP documents as well for reference. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Chris. We will now address any questions. Please remember to type your question into the question and answer box on your screen, and we'll read the questions out loud and then address with the group. So we'll take any questions now if you have them. We have one question. Does RBFF have examples of successful grantees from previous years?
Yes, with the State R3 program grants, the case studies that are helped developed by the grantees, we finalize those case studies and share them on our corporate site. You can find them in a couple places on the website. There's a state success stories section as well as on our R3 webpage on takemefishing.org/R3. You can find examples of the case studies from previous grantee programs.
We have the same question, Lisa. Thank you for answering. All right. Thank you all very much for joining the webinar. Please remember to take the survey before you exit out. We really appreciate your feedback, and it helps inform other helps inform other webinars. We will have a recording and a copy of the presentation posted online, and we'll email all of you when that's available. Thank you very much.